Weddell Sea, East Antarctica. On March 5, 2022, an international team made polar history by discovering Endurance, the ship that took British explorer Ernest Shackleton on a mission to the Antarctic, where disaster struck in 1915 and the vessel sunk. The archive would like to talk about our new sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks.io has emerged as the only platform taking billionaire art collectors head-on and lets you access their exclusive investments. Simply put, you can now invest in the very same art they do by names like Banksy, Motte, Basquiat, and other iconic artists for just a fraction of what they pay to purchase. And considering that contemporary art prices outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021, it is a sector which warrants serious consideration. Masterworks knows what they're doing when it comes to selling art. In fact, they returned 32% to their investors in 2020 and 31% in 2021. Getting started with Masterworks is super easy. You visit their website, create an account, browse their artwork, and you can diversify your portfolio with a most stable asset. Our viewers can gain priority access by clicking the link in the description. And it also really helps to support the channel, so go check it out. Shackleton's aborted attempt to cross the Antarctic has become the stuff of legend and made Endurance one of the most famous wrecks of modern times. It was Sir Ernest Shackleton's ambition to achieve the first land crossing of Antarctica from the Weddell Sea via the South Pole to the Ross Sea. The Ross Sea Party, which was landed at Hut Point on Ross Island, had the task of laying supply dumps for Shackleton's crossing party and achieved its objective, but at the cost of 3 lives lost. In the Weddell Sea, Endurance never reached land and became trapped in the dense pack ice, and the 28 men on board eventually had no choice but to abandon ship. After months spent in makeshift camps on the ice floes drifting northwards, the party took to the lifeboats to reach the inhospitable, uninhabited Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 others then made an extraordinary 800-mile open boat journey in the lifeboat to reach South Georgia. Shackleton and 2 others then crossed the mountainous island to the whaling station of Stromness. From there, Shackleton was eventually able to mount a rescue of the men waiting on Elephant Island and bring them home without loss of life. After enduring weeks on board an icebreaker in sub-zero temperatures, the modern-day team of explorers, scientists, and technicians that found Endurance captured footage of the wreckage at a depth of 3,008 meters by using a remotely operated underwater search vehicle. The expedition involved more than 60 experts from a dozen countries, coordinated by the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust. The team worked from the South African Polar Research and Logistics vessel, SA Agulhas II, owned by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and Environment and under Master Captain Knowledge Bengu, using Saab's Sabertooth hybrid underwater search vehicles. The wreck is protected as a historic site and monument under the Antarctic Treaty, ensuring that while the wreck is being surveyed and filmed, it will not be touched or disturbed in any way. Minsoon Baun, director of exploration on the Endurance 22 expedition, called it a monumental discovery and a milestone in polar history. "We have made polar history with the discovery of Endurance and successfully completed the world's most challenging shipwreck search," said John Sears, leader of the expedition that located the ship on March 5th, the 100-year anniversary of Shackleton's funeral. While the captain of Endurance, Frank Worsley, had left detailed recordings of the location of the wreck, previous attempts to find the ship had failed, mostly due to harsh conditions and ice coverage in the area. Explorers came tantalizingly close a few years ago, but lost communication with an underwater search robot that was never recovered. After Sears and his team arrived in the Weddell Sea, they combed the depths for 2 weeks using the Sabertooth underwater drones. Eventually, the team struck gold, locating Endurance around 6.5 kilometers from Worsley's coordinates. "This is, by far, the finest wooden shipwreck I have ever seen," said Bound. "It is upright, well proud of the seabed, intact, and in a brilliant state of preservation." While he never reached the South Pole, Shackleton is regarded as one of the most iconic figures from the so-called heroic age of Antarctic exploration, a period between the late 19th and early 20th centuries when intensive efforts to explore the region captured the public imagination. In 1922, Shackleton embarked on what would be his final voyage, with the objective of mapping around 3,200 kilometers of Antarctic coastline. Shackleton died of a heart attack close to the journey's beginning, just after sailing into South Georgia, and he was buried there at his wife's request. The archive wanted to open this presentation with this archaeology update for two reasons. First off, it is a huge discovery that deserves attention. And second, it is undoubtedly one of the best examples of real history. In today's online world, we find some of the most outlandish claims and conspiracy theories associated with this region of Earth. To this day, very little information is disseminated to the general public about our southernmost continent. This lack of understanding has provided fertile ground for scores of clickbait YouTubers and even fearmongers to run rampant. As we have stated in the past, the archive has no patience for these folks, as their actions help to pervert the topic of paleocontact and ultimately delegitimate the credible research and scholarship of said topic. So, in an effort to set the record straight, at least for our viewers, the archive has decided to focus on some of these claims. With readily accessible satellite images on Google Earth and other online services, there are plenty of clickbaiters presenting icebergs and other ice patterns not as natural formations, but supposed alien facilities, crashed spacecraft, and even ancient castles. Here's some examples of Google mapping images of Antarctica that have made the rounds in the online conspiracy community in recent years. This so-called buried UFO hit the news in mid-2018. The line of objects is about 1,400 meters long and located at these coordinates. The area is known as Dronning-Maud land. This Google satellite image is actually the location of the German Konin station, which is a summer research facility opened in 2000. Konin station is resupplied from Neumayer station about 757 kilometers away by a convoy of vehicles twice a year. This convoy usually consists of 6 towing vehicles and 17 cargo sleds. As it is situated on a vast ice plateau, any vehicles, sleds, and outside cargo will be arranged in a long line at 90 degrees to the prevailing wind, an arrangement sometimes called a berm. In this way, snowdrifts build up in tails that stretch away from the object, making it relatively easy to dig out any one without needing to clear any of the others. The original picture is of vehicles, sleds, and cargo laid out at 90 degrees to the prevailing wind direction, resulting in long wind tails of drifted snow. In March of 2018, this image spread across the web, claiming it to be a crashed or hidden UFO. It is located at these coordinates. In reality, it is a round pool of meltwater sitting above some ice. The angle of the picture has it partly obscured by a nearby rock, but there isn't anything deliberately hidden about it. If you use Google Earth to zoom out, you can see exactly the same shade and texture of further meltwater pools. March of 2018 seems to have been a bad year for UFO pilots in the Antarctic region. This image from the subantarctic island of South Georgia allegedly shows a crashed UFO. It is located at these coordinates. In reality, this feature is related to a large avalanche from a nearby mountain. Part of a hanging glacier collapsed and the avalanche debris is visible at the foot of the slope. The avalanche caused one particular rock to roll much further than the others, probably because it was bigger, rounder, and happened to be on a course that took it straight down the slope. Back in June 2015, another supposed image of a crashed UFO made its rounds on the internet. It is located at these coordinates. This dark streak is the object in question. The streak is actually a small nunatak, which is a rocky peak projecting from the surrounding ice, with a clear wind tail extending to the bottom left in line with the other wind tails produced by the rest of the rocky outcrops. In January 2017, claims were made that an uncovered Motte and Bailey castle had been discovered. This type of castle design was popular from the 10th to 13th century in Europe. It is located directly south of Australia at these coordinates. It's about 120 meters across, which makes it of the appropriate size range, and has two sort of circles, though the whole thing appears to be relatively flat rather than having any significant raised earthworks. Those dark blue patches inside the rings are water above ice. It is much more likely that the whole thing is a pond or shallow lake that has frozen over during the winter and now it's melting. Warming temperatures and possibly a fall in water level by draining has caused the surface ice to fall and crack into the pattern of two very rough circles. The cracks have allowed some of the remaining underlying water to flow over the top of the ice. Such patterns and movements of ice and water are commonly seen wherever there is standing water with seasonal freezing. As recently as January 2021, this image was blasted across conspiracy websites and claimed to be the remains of some sort of prehistoric beast. It is actually the skeleton of either a crab-eater or Weddell seal that died and dried out over a long period of time. There are a number of these skeletons in the area known as the dry valleys in Antarctica. Carbon dating shows that they are often hundreds of years old, the oldest found being 2,600 years old. The environment is extremely cold with strong drying winds, so they are quickly freeze-dried after death, and the lack of disturbance gives the impression that the carcass is quite recent rather than ancient. In 2020, this image of a shape resembling a cruise liner was attributed to Nazi origin and made its way to even some legitimate news websites. It is located at these coordinates. Of course, since this is a satellite view, the boat would be physically on its side. In reality, this is an iceberg that has recently tipped up due to some combination of differential erosion of the parts that were in and out of the water. It appears that some degree of breakup contributed to it becoming unbalanced and rolling over 90 degrees, so what was the horizontal waterline is now vertical. The line of windows is characteristic of erosion at the waterline by waves over a period where the berg was stable. The oldest and likely original Antarctic conspiracy theory began nearly 80 years ago. Stories about a Nazi base in Antarctica began within a week of a submarine arriving unexpectedly in Argentina shortly after the Nazi surrender in 1945. The basic story is that a German base in Antarctica was established just before the war in 1939 by the MS Schwabenland. It was expanded during the war and used to develop sophisticated secret weapons. The base was supposedly spied on by the British in Operation Tabarin prior to a failed attempt to destroy it in an SAS raid in 1945. In 1947, Operation HighJump was sent to attack the base, but they were repulsed by secret weapons. Eventually, the base was destroyed by nuclear bombs in 1958. By the time of its eventual destruction, the base is often described as being populated by hundreds or even thousands of people and defended by a range of sophisticated weaponry, including flying saucers. The base described as first built in 1939 is usually described as being about 250 kilometers inland across a previously unexplored and unmapped, creviced, and sloping ice shelf. The ship Schwabenland was in the area for just about a month. Previous Antarctic bases that had been established by Scott, Shackleton, and Amundsen and others took at least 2 weeks to construct the base buildings. The Germans were inexperienced in such things, and transport across 250 kilometers of uncharted ice field would have been difficult and time-consuming even for the experienced. The Schwabenland was equipped with a steam catapult and 2 Dornier wall flying boats, which were used to photographically survey 600,000 square kilometers. The Dornier aircraft had a payload equivalent of about 10 people, and being flying boats were unable to land and take off safely on a glacier or ice cap, so could not have been used for transport. There was simply not enough time or the resources to build a base so far inland in such a short space of time, even to house just a dozen or so men as had happened previously, let alone the hundreds imagined by authors who described this base. Part of the original conspiracy was that 2 U-boats visited Antarctica before turning up in Argentina 2 months after the end of the war in Europe. On the morning of July 10, 1945, the German U-boat U-530 did indeed arrive at the Argentine naval base in Mar della Plata, near Buenos Aires. Rumors quickly spread that Hitler, Eva Braun, Martin Bormann, and others had been on board before disembarking on the coast of Antarctica. A week later, a Hungarian exile in Argentina wrote a detailed account in a local newspaper of how Hitler and his entourage had supposedly escaped Germany. The story quickly spread worldwide, and versions of it appeared in other newspapers in many countries. On August 17th, U-977 also arrived at the same naval base, further fueling speculation. In reality, interrogation reports showed that U-530 was off the coast of New York when the news reached them of the German surrender on May 8, 1945, while U-977 was off the coast of Norway. Both boats had to travel quite slowly to conserve fuel. They traveled on the surface at night and below the surface during the day to avoid capture. This slowed them down further. The time taken for them to reach Argentina is exactly within the traveling time and speeds they could make during their separate journeys. It is claimed that the purpose of Operation HighJump, which was between 1946 and 1947, was to destroy the supposed Nazi base in Dronning-Maud land. HighJump was primarily a military rather than scientific expedition, and was one of a number at the time designed to prepare for potential cold-weather warfare in the Arctic. It was widely written about in the press at the time and accompanied by 11 journalists. Books published shortly afterwards were written by people on the expedition, and an official report was released later in 1947. Operation HighJump was centered on Little America 4, a new base on the Ross Ice Shelf which was the opposite part of the continent to Dronning-Maud land. The ships didn't leave the USA until late in the season, December 2, 1946, and arrived late to the Ross Sea after meeting a 1,000-kilometer wide belt of pack ice. They unloaded supplies and materials for the Little America 4 base on the 15th of January 1947 and left again as winter began to arrive on the 23rd of February 1947. Contrary to the conspiracy which claims that Operation HighJump ended prematurely as a result of coming under attack by Nazi secret weapons and flying saucers, the real reason for early departure was to avoid damage to the ships that did not have ice strengthening. A short summer season is usual in the Ross Sea region due to variable sea ice and relatively unpredictable advent of the austral winter. Essentially, the whole operation got off to a late start, and the weather forced an early end. By the early 1960s, the conspiracy included more recent events from 1958. It claimed that 3 nuclear bombs were used to destroy the Nazi base in Dronning-Maud land. The reality is that they were high-altitude test explosions for a particular purpose of potentially interfering with radar, radio, and electronics of satellites and missiles. They were exploded between 2,280 and 3,500 kilometers north of Antarctica. 1958 was part of the International Geophysical Year, when there was great international cooperation to study the polar regions, including the establishment of many temporary and permanent scientific bases. At this time, there were Belgian, British, Japanese, and Norwegian scientists living on newly established bases in the area. Needless to say, nuclear explosions would have been noticed and reported. Unlike the ridiculous 20th century conspiracies surrounding the continent of Antarctica, which are based on misinterpreted satellite images and incomplete historical accounts, there is one artifact that seems authentic, and it has been around for more than 500 years. A medieval-era map discovered in a Turkish palace in 1929 is dated 1513. Yet, it shows a knowledge of faraway lands well beyond the areas European explorers had traveled, and even shows land features Europeans couldn't have possibly known of about in 1513, like the Andes Mountains of South America and the coastline of the Antarctic under the ice. The map drawn on a piece of gazelle skin was said to be the work of Reis, a cartographer and admiral in the Turkish army. Antarctica is more than 98% covered in glacial ice and snow. The continent of Antarctica was discovered in 1818, several hundreds of years after the Piri-Reis map was drawn, yet it shows a landmass where Antarctica is. This, in and of itself, is astonishing, but there are more anomalies. The coastline of this landmass was unfamiliar and therefore deemed inaccurate for hundreds of years until 1961. It was then that Captain Lorenzo Burrows, a captain in the U.S. Air Force Cartography Division, noted that the outline of this southern landmass seemed to accurately depict the coastline of the continent under the ice. How is this possible, given the limitations of the surveying equipment in the 1500s? One theory is that the map was drawn using information on older maps that were made so long ago that it was before Antarctica was covered in ice. If that is the case, it is tangible proof of an advanced and much older civilization that predates known civilizations. One odd inaccuracy in the Piri-Reis map is that the tip of South America is attached to Antarctica. One theory to explain this connects to the idea of continental drift. It is theoretically possible for Antarctica to have been attached to South America in the distant past, and that it broke off from South America and formed its own continent after prehistoric seafarers charted this part of the globe. But even if this shift was the last breakage of the original giant landmass, it still would have occurred much longer ago than known human exploration. Reis added a note on the map he created that translates to say, quote, "It is related by the Portuguese infidel that in this spot night and day are at their shortest of 2 hours and at their longest of 22 hours." End quote. Due to the tilt of the Earth, the winter months in the polar regions receive very little, if any, daylight. During the summertime, however, the sun never sets and the region experiences constant sunlight. Reis indicates that he was given knowledge of this from the Portuguese, but no known Portuguese sailor had ventured that far south in the 1500s. Oddly, Reis positioned this notation near South America much further north than the regions affected by the polar winter. It could be that he simply added the notation where there was room. Other experts believe that South America was once further south of its present location and has since drifted north. The coastlines of South America and Africa, as shown on the Reis map, are surprisingly accurate, within a half a degree of longitude. The equator is also in the precise location. Prior to 1790, when the marine chronometer was invented, sailors, navigators, and cartographers had no accurate way to pinpoint a given location, yet the Reis map seems to have done that long before it was possible. Some experts claim that the Reis map is proof that there were advanced civilizations on Earth at a much earlier date than known civilizations. Others claim that the map shows that continental movement occurred more recently than geologists believe. Still, others claim the map is a work of fiction, and that it was dumb luck that it has proven to be so accurate. And of course, there are many researchers who argue that the map is solid evidence of paleo contact. Even though the secret Antarctic Nazi base, crashed UFOs, and secret weapons conspiracies can be easily refuted, countless clickbait articles and YouTube videos persist to this day. Unfortunately, such demonstrably false claims are not harmless. Many of these conspiracy theorists target audiences of legitimate topics like the ancient astronaut hypothesis. It is for this reason the archive decided to spend the time to separate and distinguish this nonsense from the serious discussion of paleo contact in Earth's ancient past.